What begins as a routine traffic stop quickly unravels into something far more sinister. When these officers pulled over Dr. Marcus Johnson, they had no idea who they were dealing with. One of Washington, D.C.'s most respected civil rights attorneys. Calm under pressure, brilliant in the courtroom, and with more influence than they could possibly imagine. They thought they were in control. They thought they could intimidate him. What they didn't know is that Dr. Johnson has spent his entire career fighting against the very system they represent. And tonight's injustice wasn't just about one arrest. It's about a legacy of discrimination, a broken system, and a reckoning that's been years in the making. Stay with us, because this ending, you won't see it coming. Drop a comment below telling us what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. We'd love to know. The air hung heavy over Washington, D.C., a thick summer evening where heat seemed to rise from the pavement in visible waves. Even at 10:30 p.m., the temperature hovered near 85 degrees, the kind of night that made people seek air conditioning rather than adventure. But Dr. Marcus Johnson had no choice but to be out. The Roberts case had kept him at the office late again, poring over depositions until his eyes burned. His charcoal gray Tesla moved silently through the tree-lined streets of Georgetown, heading toward his brownstone just 15 minutes away. The stereo played Miles Davis low and smooth, the perfect soundtrack to decompress after 18 hours of legal preparation. Tomorrow would be another long day, the final arguments in a case that had consumed 8 months of his life. Marcus loosened his tie but didn't remove it. Even at 45, some habits from his mother's strict upbringing remained. A gentleman stays presentable until he's home. She had drilled into him since childhood. His suit jacket lay carefully folded in the passenger seat. His cufflinks, a gift from his late father upon passing the bar exam, caught the occasional glint from passing streetlights. The digital dashboard clock ticked to 10:36 p.m. as he turned onto Jefferson Avenue, a route he'd taken hundreds of times before. It was less crowded than the main roads, and the old oak trees that lined both sides provided a momentary sense of escape from the urban sprawl. In his rearview mirror, Marcus noticed headlights. Police cruiser, he registered automatically. The professional part of his brain, the part that had won him recognition as one of the top civil rights attorneys in the country, immediately began calculating. Speed exactly the limit, tags current, taillight functional, insurance up to date, no reason for concern. But another part of his brain, the part that remembered being a young black boy in America, the part that had been carefully taught by his father how to survive encounters with law enforcement, that part began sending warning signals. You don't live to be a 45-year-old black man in America without developing a sixth sense for trouble. The cruiser stayed behind him for 3 blocks. Marcus maintained his speed precisely, used his turn signal with textbook timing, and kept both hands visible on the wheel. A ritual as familiar as breathing. The flash of red and blue exploded in his mirror without warning. Marcus exhaled slowly, forced his shoulders to relax, and guided the Tesla to the curb beneath a flickering street lamp. He activated his hazard lights, placed his wallet and phone on the dashboard where they would be visible, and put both hands back on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position. The cruiser door slammed, and Marcus watched in the side mirror as a figure approached. White officer, tall, buzz-cut hair, mid-30s, hand resting near his weapon. Officer Brian Kelly, according to the nameplate that came into view as he reached the window. License and registration. The officer demanded, not a question, his flashlight beam aimed directly at Marcus's face, bright enough to cause discomfort. Officer, may I ask why I'm being pulled over? Marcus asked, his voice measured, professional, the same tone he used in courtrooms when addressing hostile witnesses. License and registration first. Kelly repeated, the beam unwavering, creating halos in Marcus's vision. Of course, my license is in my wallet on the dashboard, and my registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now, if that's all right. Slowly, the officer said, an edge to his voice. Marcus moved with deliberate care, retrieving his license first, then opening the glove compartment for the registration. As he handed both items over, he noticed a second officer approaching the passenger side of his car. Female, also white, hand similarly resting near her weapon. Her nameplate read Matthews. Officer Kelly examined the license, glanced at Marcus, then back at the ID. Ducker Marcus Johnson. There was a note of surprise, maybe suspicion. Yes, that's me. This vehicle doesn't match what's on your registration. Marcus kept his expression neutral. The Tesla is new. I have the purchase paperwork and temporary registration in the console. The permanent registration hasn't arrived yet. Would you like to see the paperwork? Kelly didn't respond to the offer. Instead, he asked, "Where are you coming from, Dr. Johnson?" "My office. I'm an attorney. I was working late." "And where's your office?" "Downtown, 19th and K." "That's not the most direct route home to your address." Marcus felt the familiar knot forming in his stomach. The questions weren't about a traffic violation. They never were. "I prefer the side streets. Less traffic, more trees." Officer Matthews was now shining her flashlight through the passenger window, sweeping the beam across the interior of the car. "What's in the bag?" she called out, pointing to Marcus's briefcase on the back seat. "That's my briefcase. It contains case files, my laptop, and legal documents." "Sir, have you had anything to drink tonight?" Kelly asked, abruptly changing course. "No, officer. I don't drink. Any recreational substances? Marijuana is still federally illegal, you know, despite district laws." "No, officer. No substances of any kind." Kelly handed the license and registration back to Marcus, but didn't step away from the vehicle. "We've had reports of drug activity in this area. Several high-end vehicles moving through, making quick stops." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice even. "I assure you, I'm simply driving home from work." "You seem nervous, Dr. Johnson. Any particular reason for that?" Years of courtroom experience kept Marcus's face composed. "I'm not nervous, officer. Just tired after a long day at work." Officer Kelly stepped back slightly. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, sir." The knot in Marcus's stomach turned to ice. "May I ask why? Have I committed a traffic violation?" "Step out of the vehicle, sir. Now." Kelly's hand moved to rest more firmly on his weapon. Marcus knew what was happening. Knew it like he knew his own name. But he also knew his rights. "Officer, with all due respect, I don't believe you have probable cause to ask me to exit my vehicle. I've cooperated fully, provided my identification and registration, and answered your questions. If I haven't committed a traffic violation, I would like to continue home." Officer Matthews had circled around to Kelly's side by now. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. "Sir, final warning. Exit the vehicle now," Kelly said, his voice hardening. 2 blocks away, Elijah Parker was walking his dog, a ritual he maintained despite the late hour and the heat. The elderly history professor had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, watched it change, gentrify, yet somehow stay the same in the ways that mattered. When he saw the police lights, he paused. Something about the scene made him uneasy. He pulled out his phone, opened the camera app, and began recording. Marcus opened his car door slowly, movements deliberate, hands visible. "I'm complying, officer. But I want to state for the record that I believe this is." He never finished the sentence. Kelly grabbed his arm, yanking him from the vehicle, with enough force that Marcus stumbled, nearly falling to the pavement. "Hands behind your back! Now!" Kelly shouted as Matthews circled to the other side, her weapon now drawn. "I'm not resisting," Marcus said clearly, loud enough that his voice would carry. "There's no need for force. I'm cooperating fully." But Kelly was already spinning him around, pushing him face first against the Tesla's hood. The metal was still warm from the engine, pressing uncomfortably against Marcus's cheek as his hands were roughly pulled behind his back. "You have the right to remain silent," Kelly began, the cold metal of handcuffs closing around Marcus's wrists with a decisive click. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." From his position down the street, Professor Parker's hands shook as he continued filming. This wasn't right. He'd seen enough in his 70 years to know what was happening, and it made his blood boil. "You have the right to an attorney," Kelly continued, his knee now pressing into the back of Marcus's leg as he conducted a pat-down search. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." "I am an attorney," Marcus said calmly, despite the pressure on his leg and the awkward position. "And I want to be very clear that I do not consent to any search of my person or my vehicle. I am not resisting, but I do not consent." Officer Matthews was already searching the car, her flashlight illuminating the interior as she opened compartments. "What are you charging me with?" Marcus asked, maintaining his composure even as Kelly's grip on his cuffed wrists tightened painfully. "We'll determine that at the station," Kelly responded. "Right now, you're being detained for questioning." The officers stood Marcus up and began moving him toward the patrol car. He walked cooperatively, head high, dignity intact despite the handcuffs. As they passed under a streetlight, Marcus noticed movement. Professor Parker standing in the shadows, phone raised. A witness. Evidence. The attorney part of his brain took careful note. The back seat of the police cruiser smelled of disinfectant, layered over something more unpleasant. Marcus sat upright, refusing to slump despite the awkward position the handcuffs forced him into. Through the window, he could see Matthews still searching his Tesla, opening the trunk now. "Officer," he said to Kelly, who had settled into the driver's seat, "I want to formally request a supervisor at the scene. You've detained me without probable cause, and your partner is conducting a search without consent or a warrant." Kelly ignored him, speaking into his radio instead. "Unit 43 to dispatch. We have a combative subject in custody, bringing him in for processing." "I have not been combative," Marcus said firmly. "I've been cooperative while asserting my constitutional rights. The record will show that." Kelly turned, his face hard in the dim light of the cruiser. "The record will show what I write in my report, Dr. Johnson. You might want to remember that." As the cruiser pulled away from the curb, Marcus caught one last glimpse of his Tesla, its door still open, Officer Matthews methodically going through his belongings. In the distance, Professor Parker was still recording. The ride to the station was silent. Marcus used the time to mentally document every detail of the encounter: times, names, exact words spoken. His brain automatically framed it as he would an opening statement. At approximately 10:36 p.m., without probable cause or reasonable suspicion, Officers Kelly and Matthews initiated a pretextual stop of Dr. Marcus Johnson. By the time they arrived at the precinct, Marcus had composed the entire argument in his head. It would never go to trial, of course. Once they realized who he was, what he did for a living, they would release him with mumbled apologies or manufactured excuses. He'd seen it dozens of times representing clients in similar situations. The difference was, most of his clients didn't have law degrees and 20 years of civil rights litigation experience. Most didn't have the resources to fight back. Marcus did, and he would. The booking process was deliberately humiliating: fingerprinting, mug shots, the removal of personal items including his expensive watch and cufflinks. Marcus cooperated silently, his expression giving away nothing. "Charge?" asked the booking officer, a heavy-set man who hadn't looked directly at Marcus once. "Resisting arrest, possession of a suspected controlled substance," Kelly replied, placing a small plastic evidence bag on the counter. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, the only break in his composure. "That's not mine," he said firmly. "Whatever that is, it was not in my possession or my vehicle." Kelly smirked. "Found it in the center console. Field test shows positive for cocaine." "That's impossible," Marcus said, ice forming in his veins. This was no longer a simple case of harassment. They were framing him. "Save it for your lawyer," the booking officer said, finally looking at Marcus as he inputted the information. He paused, recognition dawning on his face. "Wait, aren't you that lawyer? The one from the news?" Marcus held the man's gaze steadily. "My name is Dr. Marcus Johnson. I'm a civil rights attorney and a partner at Barnett, Price and Johnson. I'd like my phone call now, please." The booking officer glanced at Kelly, whose expression had changed subtly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. "Process him," Kelly said shortly, turning to leave. "Officer Kelly," Marcus called after him, his voice carrying through the station with the practiced projection of a courtroom attorney. "You should know that your actions tonight were witnessed and recorded. I would strongly advise you to consider the implications of falsifying evidence against a member of the bar." Kelly froze for a moment, then continued walking without turning around. The holding cell was cold fluorescent and smelled of bleach and sweat. Marcus sat upright on the hard bench, ignoring the curious glances from the two other men sharing the space. His mind was racing, but his exterior remained calm. Years of facing hostile judges and juries had taught him the value of an unruffled demeanor. His phone call had been brief and to the point to Vanessa Richards, his law partner and closest friend. "It's Marcus. I've been arrested on falsified charges. Georgetown Precinct. Bring Jessica from Criminal Division." No emotion, just facts. Vanessa would understand everything he wasn't saying. An hour passed, then another. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a persistent companion to Marcus's thoughts. He mentally rehearsed every moment of the traffic stop, the search, the arrest. No detail was too small to remember. Just after 2 a.m., a uniform appeared at the cell door. "Johnson, your lawyer's here." Marcus stood, straightened his now rumpled white shirt as best he could, and followed the officer down a narrow corridor to an interview room. Inside, Vanessa was waiting, along with Jessica Chen, the head of their firm's criminal defense division. "Jesus, Marcus," Vanessa said when she saw him. At 50 with salt and pepper hair framing her face, she had the hardened look of someone who'd seen it all in courtrooms across the country. But now, her eyes reflected shock. "I'm fine," Marcus said, taking a seat across from them. "Thank you both for coming so quickly." Jessica, younger but equally formidable, already had a legal pad filled with notes. "They're claiming possession and resisting arrest. The possession charge is based on a substance allegedly found in your car during a search you explicitly did not consent to. The resisting charge is clearly fabricated based on the witness video." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Witness video?" Jessica slid her phone across the table. On the screen was a social media post, Professor Parker's video, already uploaded, already gathering thousands of views and comments. The caption read, "Prominent civil rights attorney Dr. Marcus Johnson unlawfully arrested in Georgetown tonight. Police planted evidence. SARYDL." Marcus watched the footage in silence. The video clearly showed him cooperating, Kelly using excessive force, and most damning of all, a brief moment where Matthews appeared to remove something from her pocket before finding it in Marcus's car. "It's been viewed over 20,000 times in the last hour," Vanessa said quietly. "It's everywhere. CNN has already called the office." Marcus handed the phone back, his expression unchanged but his mind calculating rapidly. "Have they offered any deal?" Jessica shook her head. "Not yet. They're scrambling. The captain is reviewing the bodycam footage now. I suspect they'll try to release you quietly and hope this goes away." "It won't," Marcus said, his voice gaining the same intensity he reserved for his most important closing arguments. "This ends tomorrow, but not quietly. Not this time." By morning, the video had been viewed over 1 million times. Found justice for Marcus Johnson was trending nationwide. News vans lined the street outside the precinct. Inside, Captain Leon Foster was having the worst day of his 25-year career. "Let me get this straight," he said, pacing the small office where Kelly and Matthews sat rigidly in uncomfortable chairs. "You initiated a stop on one of the most high-profile civil rights attorneys in the country, the same attorney who just last month won a $22 million settlement against the Baltimore PD for exactly this kind of misconduct, and then you falsified evidence against him." Foster's voice rose with each word until he was nearly shouting. "Sir, we didn't know who he was at the time," Matthews began. "That makes it worse," Foster exploded, "because it means you do this to regular citizens who don't have the means to fight back. Do you have any idea the storm that's coming our way?" Neither officer spoke. Foster stopped pacing and leaned against his desk, suddenly looking every day of his 55 years. "The bodycam footage confirms everything in the civilian video. Matthews, you're clearly seen planting evidence. Kelly, the use of force was excessive for a compliant subject. I have the mayor, the police commissioner, and 3 different oversight committees calling for your badges. What the hell were you thinking?" Before either could answer, there was a knock at the door. "Captain," said a young officer, looking distinctly uncomfortable, "Dr. Johnson's legal team is here. They're demanding his immediate release and a public statement from the department." Foster closed his eyes briefly. "Of course they are. Tell them I'll be right there." As the door closed, he turned back to the two officers. Both of you are suspended, effective immediately. Turn in your badges and weapons. And for God's sake, call your union reps. You're going to need them. In the precinct's conference room, Marcus sat beside Vanessa and Jessica, looking remarkably composed for a man who had spent the night in a holding cell. His shirt was wrinkled, but someone had brought him a tie and jacket. He looked less like a suspect and more like what he was, an attorney preparing to negotiate. When Captain Foster entered, Marcus didn't stand. "Dagger Johnson," Foster began, "on behalf of the department, I want to express our sincere—" "Save it." Marcus interrupted, his voice cool. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm leaving here today with all charges dropped. Officers Kelly and Matthews will be terminated, not suspended. The department will issue a public apology, acknowledging the false arrest and the planting of evidence. And you will provide us with complete, unredacted access to all disciplinary records for both officers dating back to the beginning of their employment." Foster blinked rapidly. "Dr. Johnson, while I understand your frustration, some of those demands are beyond my authority to. Then find someone with the authority," Marcus cut in. "Because if those demands aren't met by 5 p.m. today, at 5:01, I'll be holding a press conference on the steps of this precinct announcing a $50 million civil rights lawsuit against this department, the officers involved, and the city. And given the video evidence, I like my chances." He smiled thinly. "I've never lost a civil rights case against a police department captain." "Never." Foster looked to Jessica and Vanessa, perhaps hoping for more reasonable demands from them. Their expressions offered no relief. "You have until 5 p.m., Vanessa added. "And one more thing, Dr. Johnson will be leaving through the front door, where I believe several news crews are gathered. No sneaking him out the back." 5 minutes later, Marcus walked down the precinct steps into the bright morning sunlight, flanked by Vanessa and Jessica. The gathered reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. Marcus held up a hand, and the crowd quieted. Without raising his voice, he never needed to, he addressed the assembled media. "Last night, I experienced firsthand what thousands of Black Americans face every day, a justice system that presumes guilt based on the color of our skin. I was unlawfully detained, searched without consent, and framed with planted evidence, all because I was driving while black in an affluent neighborhood." He paused, letting the words sink in, cameras capturing every syllable. "But unlike so many others who have faced similar injustice, I have the resources and knowledge to fight back. The officers involved will be held accountable. The department will acknowledge its wrongdoing, and I will use every legal tool at my disposal to ensure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else in this city again." A reporter shouted, "Dr. Johnson, will you be filing a lawsuit?" Marcus's expression was steel wrapped in silk. "That depends entirely on the department's response to my demands. They have until 5 p.m. today to do the right thing. Either way, this incident will not be forgotten or swept under the rug. I've spent my career fighting for justice for others. Today, I'm fighting for myself, but also for every person who has ever been wrongfully arrested, brutalized, or murdered by those sworn to protect and serve." With that, he turned and walked toward the waiting car, reporters scrambling after him, questions flying through the air like arrows. Inside the car, once the doors closed and the privacy windows went up, Marcus finally allowed his shoulders to slump slightly. The night had taken more out of him than he wanted to admit. "You okay?" Vanessa asked quietly. Marcus nodded. "I will be, but this isn't over. Not by a long shot. The office has been flooded with calls," Jessica said, checking her phone. "News outlets, of course, but also hundreds of people sharing similar stories of police misconduct. They're asking if you'll represent them. We'll need to expand the Civil Rights Division." Marcus replied, his mind already moving forward. Strategizing, hire more attorneys paralegals. Set up a dedicated hotline. Vanessa studied him. "Marcus, you don't have to turn this into a crusade. You've been through enough." He turned to look out the window as they drove through the streets of Washington. The same streets where, just hours earlier, he'd been handcuffed and humiliated. The same streets where countless others had suffered similar or worse fates without cameras recording without law degrees to protect them. "This was always a crusade, Vanessa," he said quietly. "The only difference is now it's personal." At exactly 4:08 p.m., the press release from the Metropolitan Police Department landed in newsrooms across the city. Far amumdiati release. The Metropolitan Police Department announces the termination of officers Brian Kelly and Sarah Matthews following their involvement in the wrongful arrest of Dr. Marcus Johnson. An internal investigation has confirmed that both officers violated multiple departmental policies, including the falsification of evidence. The department extends its sincere apologies to Dr. Johnson and acknowledges this incident as a serious breach of the public trust. A complete review of training procedures and disciplinary protocols will be conducted by an independent oversight committee. Marcus read the statement on his office computer, Vanessa looking over his shoulder. "They blinked," she said. "They had no choice," he replied. "But this is just the beginning." On his desk lay a legal pad filled with notes for a new initiative, the creation of a specialized legal clinic dedicated to representing victims of police misconduct. Next to it was a list of meetings already scheduled with community leaders, activist organizations, and potential donors. His phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "CNN wants you live at 8, MSNBC at 9. Fox surprisingly also called. Another message arrived from an unknown number. "Dr. Johnson, you don't know me, but I witnessed what happened to you. I've experienced similar treatment from those same officers. Would you be willing to speak with me?" Michael Torres. As Marcus began to respond, his office door opened. Sharon, his longtime assistant, appeared with an uncharacteristically uncertain expression. "Dr. Johnson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent. A Professor Elijah Parker." Marcus looked up, recognizing the name immediately. The witness, the man who had recorded the video that might have saved his career, possibly his life. "Send him in," Marcus said, standing. "And Sharon, hold all my other calls for now." Professor Parker entered hesitantly, a thin man with a shock of white hair and the dignified bearing of an academic. He carried a worn leather messenger bag and looked around the impressive office with undisguised appreciation. "Dr. Johnson," he said, extending a hand. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Professor, please. Sit down. I believe I owe you my gratitude." Parker waved away the thanks as he settled into the chair across from Marcus. "I only did what anyone should do when witnessing an injustice. But that's not why I'm here." He opened his messenger bag and removed a thick manila folder. "After I posted that video, I started receiving messages. Dozens at first, then hundreds. All from people in the district who've had similar experiences with those same officers. Some with video evidence, some without. Most never reported their experiences because they didn't think anyone would believe them." He placed the folder on Marcus's desk and slid it forward. "I took the liberty of organizing them by date, officer involved, and severity of the allegations. There's a pattern here, Dr. Johnson. A very disturbing pattern." Marcus opened the folder. The first page contained a photograph of a young black man with a badly bruised face. The caption read, "James Wilson, 22, Georgetown student, stopped by officers Kelly and Matthews for matching the description of a robbery suspect. Charges later dropped. Required hospitalization for orbital fracture." Page after page documented similar incidents. Young men and women, predominantly black and Latino, all with stories of harassment, false arrests, and in many cases, physical violence, all involving the same officers, all eventually dismissed or settled quietly. "This goes back 3 years. Professor Parker said quietly, "I believe these officers have been systematically targeting minorities in affluent neighborhoods, making pretextual stops and escalating to false arrests and excessive force. Some victims were students, some professionals, some just ordinary citizens in the wrong place at the wrong time." Marcus looked up from the documents, his expression grave. "How did you compile all this so quickly?" "I haven't slept," Parker admitted with a small smile. "But more importantly, these stories were already out there, waiting for someone to connect them. Your incident was the catalyst that brought them to light." Marcus closed the folder and stood, walking to the window that overlooked the National Mall in the distance. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the monuments and memorials to justice and liberty. "Professor Parker," he said finally, turning back to face the older man, "would you be willing to work with my team on this? We're establishing a new division focused exclusively on police accountability. These cases, these victims, they deserve justice, and the pattern you've identified suggests a systemic problem that goes beyond just two officers." Parker's eyes brightened. "I was hoping you'd ask. I'm a historian by trade, Dr. Johnson. My specialty is civil rights movements in America. I've documented the struggles of others for decades. It would be an honor to be part of making history, rather than just recording it." Marcus extended his hand. "Then welcome aboard, Professor. I believe we're about to start something important here." As they shook hands, Sharon appeared in the doorway again. "Dr. Johnson, I'm sorry, but you should see this." She held up her tablet, displaying a breaking news alert. The headline read, "Civil Rights Attorney Marcus Johnson to face criminal investigation committee hearing following controversial arrest." Below it was a statement from Congressman William Hayes, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. "While the video of Dr. Johnson's arrest raises serious concerns, we must also investigate allegations that Dr. Johnson has used his position to target law enforcement unfairly. The committee has voted to hold hearings next week, where all parties can present their sides of this troubling incident." Marcus read the statement twice, his expression unchanging. "They're trying to turn this around on you," Vanessa said, having appeared behind Sharon to read over her shoulder. "Make you the aggressor instead of the victim." "Of course they are," Marcus replied calmly. "Congressman Hayes has received substantial campaign contributions from police unions for years. This was predictable. What will you do?" Professor Parker asked, looking concerned. A slow smile spread across Marcus's face, not of amusement, but of determination. "I'll do what I've always done, Professor. I'll prepare my case, gather my evidence, and walk into that hearing room ready to speak truth to power." He turned to Vanessa. "Call Jessica. Tell her to prepare subpoenas for the complete personnel files of every officer in that precinct. Tell her we'll need statistical analyses of all arrests made in that district broken down by race, gender, and economic status for the past 5 years." Vanessa nodded, already typing notes on her phone. "Sharon," Marcus continued, "contact the National Bar Association and the ACLU. We'll need amicus briefs supporting our position." "Yes, Dr. Johnson." Marcus turned back to Professor Parker. "And Professor, if you're willing, I'd like you to prepare a historical context brief on police misconduct in the district, particularly in predominantly white neighborhoods. The committee needs to understand this isn't an isolated incident, but part of a long, troubling pattern." Parker stood straighter, energy seeming to flow into his thin frame. "It would be my honor, Doc Johnson." As they dispersed to their various tasks, Marcus remained by the window, gazing out at the city. The sun had nearly set now, the monuments illuminated against the darkening sky. In the reflection of the glass, he could see his own face composed, determined, unbowed. They had picked the wrong man to harass that night. But more importantly, they had created the perfect opportunity for real change. Marcus intended to seize it with both hands. The next 7 days passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus's office transformed into a war room, with attorneys, paralegals, and researchers working around the clock. Professor Parker's dossier grew to include over 50 cases of similar police misconduct, complete with affidavits from victims willing to testify. News coverage remained intense. Marcus appeared on selected programs, always composed, always on message. This wasn't about him, but about a systemic problem that required systemic solutions. On social media, the debate raged. Many expressed outrage at his treatment and demanded accountability. Others, including a vocal contingent of Blue Lives Matter supporters, accused him of orchestrating the incident for publicity or of having an anti-police agenda. Marcus ignored the noise and focused on preparation. He reviewed every document, rehearsed his testimony, anticipated every possible line of questioning. By the evening before the hearing, he felt as ready as he could be. He was reviewing his opening statement one final time when his cell phone rang, an unknown number. "Dr. Johnson," he answered, still scanning the document before him. "Dr. Johnson, "This is Officer Raymond Wilson." The voice was hesitant, uncertain. I work at the Georgetown precinct." Marcus's attention sharpened immediately. "What can I do for you?" "Officer Wilson, I was on duty the night you were arrested. I didn't participate, but I saw Officer Matthews preparing the evidence before your car was even searched. I heard them planning the stop earlier that evening." Marcus set down his pen, giving the caller his full attention. "Officer Wilson, what you're describing is conspiracy to violate civil rights." "I know." The voice on the other end was barely above a whisper now. "That's why I'm calling. I can't keep quiet anymore. What they did to you, it wasn't the first time. It's like a game to them, targeting successful minorities in upscale neighborhoods. Would you be willing to testify to this?" A long pause. "I have a family, Dr. Johnson, a pension. If I come forward, I understand the risks," Marcus said, his tone softening. "But consider this, if officers like Kelly and Matthews are allowed to continue, the damage to public trust in law enforcement will be far greater than any short-term fallout from your testimony." Another pause, longer this time. "The hearing is tomorrow, right? I'll think about it overnight. That's all I can promise." "That's fair. Thank you for calling, Officer Wilson. Whatever you decide, know that you did the right thing by reaching out." After the call ended, Marcus sat motionless for several minutes, contemplating this new development. A whistleblower from within the department would be powerful, perhaps game-changing. But he couldn't count on it. Officer Wilson might yet decide that self-preservation outweighed justice. Marcus returned to his preparation with renewed focus. With or without the officer's testimony, he would be ready. The hearing room was packed to capacity the next morning. The House Judiciary Committee sat arrayed on an elevated dais, with Congressman Hayes at the center, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority. News cameras lined the back wall. In the gallery, supporters and critics alike waited for the proceedings to begin. Marcus sat at the witness table, flanked by Vanessa and Jessica. He wore a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and a deep blue tie, his courtroom uniform, always impeccable. Before him lay a single leather portfolio containing his opening statement and key evidence documents. "This hearing will come to order," Congressman Hayes announced, his gavel striking with unnecessary force. "We are here today to investigate the circumstances surrounding the arrest of Dr. Marcus Johnson and subsequent allegations of police misconduct. We will also examine concerns about potential anti-police bias in Dr. Johnson's legal practice." The framing was clear from the outset. Hayes intended to put Marcus on trial, not the officers who had arrested him. "Dr. Johnson," Hayes continued, looking down at Marcus with barely concealed disdain, "you may begin with your opening statement." Marcus rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket as he stood, a courtroom habit ingrained over decades. He took a moment to survey the committee members, 12 men and women who held significant power over law enforcement policy in the country. Some he knew to be allies in the fight for civil rights. Others, like Hayes, were staunch defenders of police regardless of circumstances. "Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee," Marcus began, his voice resonant and measured. "Last week, I was unlawfully detained, subjected to excessive force, and framed with planted evidence by officers of the Metropolitan Police Department. This was not due to any crime I committed, but simply because I was a black man driving an expensive car in an affluent neighborhood." He paused, letting the words settle across the room. "I am not here today seeking personal redress. The department has already terminated the officers involved and issued a public apology. I am here because what happened to me is not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that affects countless Americans who lack my resources and platform." Marcus gestured to the thick binder of evidence before him. "With the help of concerned citizens, we have documented 57 similar incidents involving the same officers over the past 3 years. In each case, the victim was a person of color. In each case, the stop lacked probable cause. And in many cases, evidence was falsified to justify the arrest." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Several committee members leaned forward, interest peaked. "This is not an indictment of all police officers," Marcus continued. It is a call to address a systemic problem that undermines public safety and erodes trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. When citizens fear those sworn to protect them, when officers target individuals based on race rather than behavior, the very foundation of justice is compromised. Marcus looked directly at Hayes, refusing to be intimidated. Some have suggested that my legal work shows anti-police bias. Let me be clear, holding bad actors accountable is not anti-police. It is pro-justice, it is pro-community, and ultimately, it is pro-police, because it helps restore the trust and legitimacy that good officers need to do their jobs effectively. Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I am prepared to answer your questions and to provide detailed evidence supporting every assertion I have made. But I ask this committee to remember, this hearing should not be about me. It should be about ensuring that what happened to me never happens to anyone else. Thank you. Marcus returned to his seat, aware of the impact his words had made. Several committee members were nodding slightly. Others looked troubled. Hayes appeared annoyed. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, Hayes said curtly. We will now proceed to questions. I'll begin. Hayes shuffled papers before him, clearly preparing to go on the offensive. Dr. Johnson, in the past 5 years, your law firm has filed 28 lawsuits against police departments across the country, resulting in settlements totaling over $130 million. Isn't it fair to say that police litigation has become a lucrative business for you? The question was designed to paint Marcus as a profiteer, rather than an advocate. He'd anticipated it. Congressman, those 28 lawsuits represent 28 instances where police conduct was so egregious that departments chose to settle rather than defend it in court. Those settlements provided some measure of justice to victims of brutality, wrongful arrest, and in 3 cases, fatal shootings of unarmed civilians. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice unwavering. A's for the financial aspect. My firm donates 30% of all settlement proceeds to community organizations working to improve police, community relations. This is a matter of public record, which I'm happy to provide to the committee. Hayes frowned, his first line of attack blunted. He pivoted quickly. In your numerous media appearances over the years, you've repeatedly characterized police departments as institutionally racist. Don't statements like that reveal a bias that might have influenced your behavior during the traffic stop? My statements reflect documented realities of disparate treatment based on race. Marcus replied calmly. They are supported by decades of research, Department of Justice investigations, and the lived experiences of millions of Americans. As for my behavior during the traffic stop, I would direct the committee to the video evidence, which clearly shows me cooperating fully while asserting my constitutional rights. Before Hayes could continue, Congresswoman Diane Rodriguez, a former prosecutor known for her sharp questioning, cut in. If I may, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Johnson, in the materials you provided to the committee, you mentioned that Officers Kelly and Matthews had multiple prior complaints for similar conduct. Could you elaborate on that? Marcus nodded, grateful for the redirect to substantive issues. Yes, Congresswoman. Our investigation revealed that Officer Kelly had 17 complaints for excessive force and illegal searches, all filed by people of color. Officer Matthews had 11 similar complaints. All were dismissed during internal reviews without substantial investigation. We've included the full complaint histories in the materials provided. Rodriguez looked troubled, and these complaints weren't flagged in any way. No pattern recognition. None that resulted in disciplinary action, Marcus confirmed, which points to a failure of oversight and accountability within the department. As the questioning continued, the door at the back of the hearing room opened quietly. A uniformed police officer slipped in and took a seat in the last row. Marcus recognized him immediately from his department photo, Officer Raymond Wilson. The whistleblower had come. Congressman James Turner, a former civil rights attorney himself, took his turn at questioning. Dr. Johnson, beyond the specific incidents involving these 2 officers, what systemic changes would you recommend to prevent similar abuses of power? Marcus had prepared extensively for this question. It was the heart of why he'd agreed to testify. First, we need genuinely independent oversight of police departments. Internal affairs divisions have inherent conflicts of interest. Second, body camera footage should be automatically reviewed when certain triggers occur, uses of force, searches without documented consent, or any citizen complaint. Third, pattern recognition software should flag officers who accumulate multiple similar complaints, triggering automatic review. He continued, laying out a comprehensive reform agenda that included improved training, community involvement in police oversight, and changes to qualified immunity doctrines that often shielded officers from accountability. As Marcus spoke, he noticed several committee members taking detailed notes. Even some who had seemed skeptical were paying close attention. Hayes, however, looked increasingly frustrated as the hearing moved away from attacking Marcus and towards substantive policy discussion. When Turner finished, Hayes attempted to regain control. "We should return to the specific incident involving Dr. Johnson," he said brusquely. "I note that toxicology reports show no substances in your system, but the field test on the substance allegedly found in your vehicle tested positive for cocaine. How do you explain that?" It was a dangerous question, designed to plant doubt about Marcus's innocence despite the video evidence of the planted drugs. "I can't explain it, Congressman, because it never happened." Marcus replied firmly, "The substance was planted by Officer Matthews, as clearly shown in the video evidence. Field tests are notoriously unreliable, with false positive rates as high as 70% for certain substances. But more importantly, the Metropolitan Police Department has already acknowledged that the evidence was falsified. That's why the officers were terminated." Hayes opened his mouth to press further, but was interrupted by a commotion at the back of the room. Officer Wilson had stood and was requesting to be recognized. "Mr. Chairman," called Congresswoman Rodriguez, "it appears we have a witness who wishes to speak. Given the importance of this matter, I move that we hear his testimony." Hayes looked displeased but trapped by parliamentary procedure. "And you are?" he asked Wilson coldly. "Officer Raymond Wilson, Metropolitan Police Department, Georgetown Precinct," Wilson replied, his voice shaking slightly but gaining strength as he continued. "I have direct knowledge of the incidents being discussed and wish to testify under oath." The gallery erupted in whispers. Hayes gavelled for order, looking distinctly unhappy with this turn of events. "The committee will take a 15-minute recess to prepare for this additional witness," he announced tersely. As the committee members filed out, Marcus turned to Vanessa, keeping his expression neutral despite his inner triumph. "He came," she whispered. "This changes everything." "Maybe," Marcus cautioned. "Let's see what he says first." When the hearing resumed, Officer Wilson sat at the witness table, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform. He had been sworn in and provided his credentials for the record. Hayes, clearly displeased with this development, began the questioning with obvious hostility. "Officer Wilson, you claim to have knowledge of the arrest of Dr. Johnson. Were you present at the scene?" "No, sir," Wilson replied. "I was at the precinct when Officers Kelly and Matthews brought him in. But I was present earlier that evening when they discussed plans to conduct targeted stops in Georgetown." "Targeted how?" Rodriguez asked, leaning forward. Wilson swallowed hard. "They called it phishing, looking specifically for minorities driving high-end vehicles or walking in affluent neighborhoods. They had a scoring system based on the perceived disparity between the person and their surroundings." The room fell silent, the implications of his words sinking in. "Are you suggesting these officers were deliberately targeting people based on race?" Turner asked. "Yes, sir," Wilson confirmed. "And it wasn't just Kelly and Matthews. There's an unofficial group within the precinct. They call themselves the Georgetown Guardians. Their stated purpose is to keep the neighborhood safe. But in practice, they target minorities who they believe don't belong there." Marcus watched Hayes's face transition from annoyance to alarm. This testimony was going far beyond one incident or two rogue officers. It was exposing an organized pattern of misconduct that could implicate dozens of officers and supervisors. "Officer Wilson," Rodriguez continued, "were supervisors aware of these practices?" Wilson hesitated, then committed fully. "Yes, ma'am. Sergeant Thomas Brandt not only knew but encouraged it. He tracked the number of stops and arrests, praising officers who had high numbers, And why have you decided to come forward now? Hayes asked, his tone suggesting Wilson must have ulterior motives. The officer looked directly at Marcus before answering. Because I became a police officer to help people, to serve the community. What happened to Dr. Johnson? What's been happening for years? It's wrong. It violates everything the badge is supposed to stand for. I couldn't stay silent anymore. For the next hour, Wilson detailed specific incidents, named officers involved, and described how complaints were systematically buried or dismissed. He provided dates, case numbers, and enough specific details to make his testimony virtually unassailable. By the time he finished, the mood in the room had transformed completely. Even Hayes seemed subdued, perhaps recognizing that this had moved beyond partisan politics into potential criminal conspiracy. In light of Officer Wilson's testimony, Turner said, I move that this committee refer this matter to the Department of Justice for a full pattern and practice investigation of the Metropolitan Police Department, with particular focus on the Georgetown precinct. The motion passed unanimously. Even Hayes could not afford to be seen opposing it given the gravity of the revelations. As the hearing concluded, Marcus approached Officer Wilson, who stood alone, looking simultaneously relieved and terrified. Thank you, Marcus said simply, extending his hand. Wilson took it, his grip firm despite his obvious nervousness. I may have just ended my career, he said quietly. You may have just saved countless people from harassment and false arrest. Marcus countered. That counts for something. Wilson nodded, not entirely convinced. What happens now? Now, Marcus said. We make sure your testimony leads to real change. The aftermath of the hearing unfolded with remarkable speed. Within days, the Department of Justice announced a formal investigation into the Metropolitan Police Department. A week later, the Georgetown Guardians were exposed in a front-page Washington Post investigation, complete with internal communications and statistical analyses showing racial disparities in stops and arrests. Sergeant Brandt and 3 other supervisors were suspended pending investigation. 6 more officers resigned rather than face scrutiny, and former officers Kelly and Matthews were now facing federal civil rights charges in addition to local criminal charges for evidence tampering and false arrest. For Marcus, the personal vindication was merely a starting point. The day after the hearing, he called a meeting of his partners at the firm. We need to create something permanent, he told them as they gathered in the conference room. A dedicated institute focused on police accountability and reform. Not just litigation, but education, policy development, community outreach. Vanessa, always the practical one, asked, What are you proposing exactly? The Johnson Institute for Justice and Policing, Marcus replied. A separate entity from the firm but connected to it. We provide the initial funding and legal expertise, then bring in researchers, former law enforcement, community organizers, people who can approach this from multiple perspectives. Jessica nodded slowly. It's ambitious. But after what happened, we could attract significant funding. The timing is right. More than right. Professor Parker added. He had been invited to the meeting at Marcus's request. What you experienced has created a window of opportunity for meaningful reform, but window's close. We need to institutionalize the momentum. The discussion continued for hours: logistics, funding models, organizational structure. By the end, the concept had evolved from idea to plan. The firm's partners unanimously approved an initial $10 million commitment from their reserves. 3 months later, Marcus stood at a podium in the newly renovated building that would house the Johnson Institute. Behind him were community leaders, reform-minded police officials, civil rights activists, and elected officials, a coalition that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. What happened to me was not unique, he told the assembled crowd and cameras. What is unique is the opportunity we now have to transform that injustice into lasting change. The Johnson Institute will focus on 3 pillars: accountability through litigation, reform through policy, and healing through community engagement. He gestured to Officer Wilson, who stood uncomfortably in the front row, no longer in uniform but still carrying himself with the bearing of law enforcement. We will not succeed by demonizing all police. Many officers, like Raymond Wilson, Join the force with a genuine desire to serve and protect. Our goal is to create systems where good officers can thrive and bad actors cannot hide." The speech continued, outlining specific initiatives already underway: a database tracking police misconduct nationwide, model legislation for independent oversight, training programs for both officers and communities to improve interactions. As Marcus spoke, he noticed a figure standing at the back of the room, Captain Foster from the Georgetown precinct. Not in uniform, but clearly there in an official capacity. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. When the formal ceremony ended and the crowd began to mingle, Foster approached Marcus directly. "Decker Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm not sure if I'm welcome here, but I wanted to come anyway." Marcus shook the offered hand, studying the captain's face. "Everyone committed to real reform is welcome, Captain Foster." Foster nodded, looking uncomfortable but determined. "I've been named interim commander of the Georgetown precinct while the investigation continues. It's worse than anyone realized. The culture was toxic from top to bottom. And now," Marcus asked, "now we rebuild." Foster said simply, "I've implemented immediate changes, new supervision protocols, community oversight panels, retraining requirements. But I need help." He hesitated, then continued, "Your help specifically. The department has authorized me to request that the Johnson Institute work directly with us on reform efforts." It was a remarkable turnaround from arresting Marcus to seeking his expertise in just 3 months. But Marcus understood the opportunity it represented. "Would be willing to discuss a formal partnership," he said carefully, "with certain conditions about transparency and independence." "Of course," Foster agreed quickly. "This only works if people trust the process. And right now, trust is in short supply." As they continued their conversation, journalists circled, sensing the significance of this unlikely alliance. By that evening, news programs across the country were featuring images of Marcus Johnson and Captain Foster in deep discussion, with headlines proclaiming a new era of police, community cooperation. The reality, of course, was more complicated than any headline could capture. The path forward would be difficult, with resistance from both entrenched police interests and community skeptics who doubted real change was possible. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt genuine hope. What had begun as a humiliating, frightening experience had catalyzed a movement that might actually create lasting reform. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the Institute staff had gone home, Marcus walked alone through the empty building. The renovations were nearly complete. Offices for attorneys and researchers, meeting spaces for community groups, a state of the art training center where police and civilians could engage in simulations designed to improve interactions and reduce deadly encounters. His phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "CNN wants you for their special report tomorrow. You in?" Marcus smiled slightly. The media attention was useful for keeping pressure on those in power, but the real work would happen away from the cameras in policy meetings, community forums, training sessions, and yes, courtrooms when necessary. He texted back, "Yes, but only if they also interview Wilson and Foster. This isn't about me anymore." 6 months after the incident, Marcus found himself back in a courtroom, this time as an observer rather than an advocate. The federal trial of officers Kelly and Matthews had reached its final day. The prosecution's case had been overwhelming, bolstered by Officer Wilson's testimony and records uncovered during the Department of Justice investigation. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. As the former officers were led away in handcuffs, experiencing the same humiliation they had inflicted on countless others, Marcus felt no satisfaction, only a somber sense of justice served. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for his reaction. The verdicts today affirm an essential principle: no one is above the law, especially those entrusted to enforce it. He told them, but criminal prosecution is just one component of reform. The more important changes are happening in police departments across the country that are reimagining what public safety looks like when it truly serves all communities equally. He declined to answer further questions, walking instead to where Raymond Wilson waited beside a car. "You're getting good at those sound bites," Wilson said with a small smile as they pulled away from the courthouse. "A necessary skill in this line of work," Marcus replied. Wilson had joined the Johnson Institute as its law enforcement liaison, using his inside knowledge to help design training programs and accountability measures. "The community forum tonight is completely full," Wilson said, changing the subject. "Standing room only. People seem to actually believe change is possible now." Marcus nodded, watching the city pass by outside the window. The same streets where he'd once been handcuffed and humiliated were now the site of a remarkable experiment in reform. The Georgetown precinct, under Foster's leadership and with the Institute's guidance, had implemented a comprehensive overhaul of policies and practices. Early results showed dramatic decreases in use of force incidents and civilian complaints, alongside improved crime-solving rates. The model was now being studied by departments nationwide. Even Hayes, the once hostile congressman, had recently visited the Institute to learn more about its methods. "Change is possible," Marcus said finally. "Difficult, slow, imperfect, but possible." As they arrived at the community center, where the forum would be held, Marcus saw a line stretching around the block, citizens of all races, ages, and backgrounds waiting to participate in a discussion about the future of policing in their city. Among them were familiar faces: Professor Parker, chatting with community elders, Captain Foster deep in conversation with local activists, Vanessa and Jessica distributing information about citizen rights and responsibilities during police encounters. The sight filled Marcus with a profound sense of purpose. The trauma of his arrest would always be part of him, a reminder of vulnerability that no success or status could eliminate. But it had also become a catalyst for something larger than himself, a movement that might, in time, prevent others from suffering similar indignities. As he stepped from the car, people noticed him and began to applaud. Marcus acknowledged them with a nod, then moved toward the entrance. There was work to be done. The Johnson Institute expanded rapidly over the next year, opening branches in 5 additional cities where high-profile cases of police misconduct had created opportunities for reform. Each followed the same model: litigation where necessary, policy reform where possible, and community engagement always. Marcus divided his time between running the institute and continuing his work with the law firm. Though he had scaled back his caseload to focus on matters with systemic impact, he had also, somewhat to his own surprise, accepted an appointment to a presidential commission on law enforcement reform, working alongside police officials, civil rights leaders, and criminal justice experts to develop national standards. The work was exhausting but fulfilling. For every success story, departments embracing reform, officers like Wilson stepping forward to demand change from within, communities seeing measurable improvements in both safety and justice, there were frustrating setbacks. Entrenched interests fought back, politicians wavered, progress stalled or reversed. But overall, the momentum continued. The very public nature of Marcus's case and its aftermath had created a narrative that resonated across political and cultural divides. It wasn't about attacking police, but about ensuring that policing lived up to its highest ideals. On the 1-year anniversary of his arrest, Marcus returned to the spot where it had happened. The street looked the same: quiet, affluent, lined with trees that were just beginning to show their fall colors. He parked his car, a different one now. He donated the Tesla to a community organization and stood on the sidewalk, remembering the fear, the humiliation, the cold metal of handcuffs, the disbelief that it was happening to him despite all his precautions, all his success, all his careful adherence to unwritten rules that were supposed to provide some measure of protection. "Jigar, Johnson." The voice startled him from his thoughts. He turned to find a young black woman standing a few feet away, a law book clutched to her chest. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said quickly. "I'm Alicia Washington. I'm a first-year law student at Georgetown. I recognized you from everywhere." She laughed nervously. "It's no bother," Marcus assured her. "What can I do for you, Ms. Washington?" She hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "Your case, what happened to you right here, it's why I decided to go to law school. I was planning to go into corporate law, something safe and lucrative, but watching how you turned what happened to you into a movement for change. It made me realize that the law can be more than just a career. It can be a tool for justice. Marcus felt an unexpected surge of emotion. He had received countless messages of support over the past year, had spoken to audiences of thousands, had testified before Congress multiple times. But something about this young woman, standing on the exact spot where his life had changed so dramatically, affected him deeply. "The law is indeed a powerful tool," he said finally, "but its value depends entirely on who wields it and for what purpose." Alicia nodded eagerly. "That's what I want to learn, how to wield it effectively, the way you do. I applied for an internship at the Johnson Institute for next summer." She looked down, suddenly shy. "I know you probably get thousands of applications, but I wanted you to know what an inspiration you've been. No matter what happens with the internship." Before Marcus could respond, a police cruiser turned onto the street, slowing as it approached them. Both Marcus and Alicia tensed automatically, an instinctual response neither could fully suppress, despite all the supposed progress of the past year. The cruiser stopped, and an officer emerged, a young black man in a crisp uniform. He approached with a respectful demeanor, keeping a comfortable distance. "Dr. Johnson," he said with a nod. "Officer James Harris, Georgetown Precinct. Captain Foster mentioned you might be here today. He asked me to check if everything was all right." Marcus relaxed slightly, recognizing the name. Harris was one of the new officers hired as part of the department's diversity initiative, a program the Institute had helped develop. "Everything's fine, Officer Harris. Just revisiting old memories and making new acquaintances." He gestured to Alicia, who still looked somewhat tense. "This is Ms. Washington, a law student at Georgetown." Harris smiled at her. "Future competition for Dr. Johnson, then. The department could use good attorneys committed to making sure we do our jobs right." The interaction was brief, professional, and notably lacking in the underlying tension that had characterized so many police encounters in the past. As Harris departed with a respectful nod, Marcus found himself reflecting on the subtle but significant change it represented. "That," he said to Alicia, who looked slightly amazed by the exchange, "is what progress looks like. Small, everyday interactions where dignity and respect replace suspicion and fear." Alicia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's so different from what happened to you here." "Yes and no," Marcus replied. "The circumstances have changed, but the principles haven't. Justice, dignity, equal protection under law, these aren't new concepts. We're just trying to make them reality rather than rhetoric." He glanced at his watch, then back at the young law student. "I have a meeting at the Institute in an hour. Would you like to join me? We can discuss that internship application of yours." Her eyes widened. "Really? I mean, yes, absolutely, thank you." As they walked to his car, Marcus felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing. 1 year ago, he had stood on this spot feeling vulnerable and humiliated. Today, he stood as a catalyst for change, mentoring the next generation who would carry the work forward. The road ahead remained long and difficult. Reform was fragile, progress non-linear. But as he opened the car door for Alicia Washington, future attorney and advocate, Marcus Johnson allowed himself a moment of genuine optimism. What had begun as a tragic example of injustice had transformed into something powerful and enduring, not just the Johnson Institute or policy reforms or legal precedents, but a renewed commitment to the fundamental promise of American justice, equal treatment under the law, regardless of race, status, or circumstance. It was, Marcus reflected as they drove away, perhaps the most meaningful case he had ever tried, the case that began with his own wrongful arrest and would continue long after he was gone, argued by generations of advocates, like the young woman beside him, in the courtroom of public conscience, with nothing less than the soul of American justice at stake. In a world that often moves too quickly, that forgets yesterday's outrage in favor of today's distraction, the story of Dr. Marcus Johnson stands as a reminder that change is possible, but never easy or automatic. It requires courage, persistence, and the willingness to transform personal pain into public purpose. For those watching, especially those who have experienced similar injustices without cameras recording or law degrees protecting them, His journey offers both validation and hope, validation that their experiences are real and unjust, hope that systems can be reformed when enough voices demand it. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more narratives that don't just entertain but illuminate. And remember that justice isn't an abstract concept, but a daily practice, built or undermined by each of our actions and choices. Thank you for listening. The conversation continues.